I think he's using the Lord's Supper as an example, but I don't think he's talking about the Lord's Supper yet.
So here, let's start off with verse 16. He's dealing with a problem that we have in the getting into mixing things up with the pagans, okay? So let's look at verse 16, and we can start with Jerry here, and then we'll go to Chris, and then we'll pick up with James. And Shane, if you want to, I'll let you translate or at least read, if you would, okay? All right?
Ready?
Go ahead, please.
To potarion, tes, eulogias, ho, eulogumen, uki, koinonia, tu, matos, tu, Christu, estin, ton, harton, on, kolomen, uki, koi onia, tu, so matos, tu, Christu, estin. And I put the cup of blessing which we bless, is it not even in fellowship of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not even with fellowship of the body of Christ?
So he is using. Do you have anything to add to that? Anybody want comments you want to make before I start commenting?
I think he's using the Lord's Supper as an example of like you talked about before, keeping things pure, because it's going to get down to the point of not mixing it in with tenets of idolatrous worship.
Okay. So we pronounce a blessing upon the cup as Jesus blessed the cup. He blessed it. And the greater is blessed of the lesser. And so therefore the fruit of the vine is just common grape juice till it's blessed. And it makes it holy by our prayers. And so we need to keep it separate and holy. It may not be used, I don't believe it's to be a common meal under those conditions then. Any comments there? I think this is probably in the background of chapter 11, verse 17. All right. Now, he doesn't say that fruit of the vine is his blood. It's a communion of the blood or fellowship. Fellowship is what? What is fellowship?
It's with, I'm trying to remember what the answer to that is, but it starts with.
And it's on the screen up here. It's a communion, and is its joint participation between two. And so there's some things we can't jointly participate in with the world in. And I think the Lord's Supper is one of the things we're not to participate with the world in. Here it's telling us that. I don't think non-Christians should be partaking of the Lord's Supper. Okay? That's just my interpretation there.
That's always been an issue through the ages where some would do closed communion and give you a wafer, says you're allowed, and then they would say, well, you goofed up this week, no communion. And so my understanding is we've always practiced open communion, and we explain what it's for and who it's for, and then it's up to the ones partaking. That we don't really have we don't use a mechanism to deny the world, but the world doesn't tend to come to worship the Lord either.
Right. I think that they should not partake of it, and because it's set aside for the saints to partake of. But that's another study for another time.
You don't always know either. So
I think if we don't know, we we have to let them decide for themselves, but I see a problem with it. Because it's a worship that is wholly separate and set aside for the saints to partake of. I think that's where the fellowship of the communion comes in, participating with those that are fellow Christians. But anyhow, it's a rhetorical question, and in this case here, it has the word "ooh" with it, and that always expects a yes answer. Is it not the blood of Christ? The answer is yes, it is. It's the communion of the blood of Christ, is it not? That would be a good translation. And the bread, the communion of the body of Christ. And again, that's a rhetorical question. So I translated verse 16, the cup of blessing that we bless, it is a communion of the blood of Christ, is it not? The bread that we break, it is a communion of the body of Christ, is it not? So that fellowship with it. So we're not to have fellowship with idols. So we're not to participate with them.
And this is in context, this is a discussion of what he just talked about, fleeing from, staying away from that worship of idols. Here's an example of why.
I thought, go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
Well, I was going to say, I thought sometime back I had read something in the ante-Nicene writings where for communion, they actually asked people who were not Christians to leave and then they would take it, the communion. Does that ring a bell?
I think that's true, yes.
Okay.
Remember when I was younger, they wouldn't, if a person wanted to remember the church, they passed by. They didn't offer it to them.
We do that when we know, like the young ones or something like that, if we know it.
Yeah.
But if you got a visitor.
And you don't know.
No.
Yeah. But that's most of the denominations, that's what they practice. The Baptists do that, the Roman Catholics do that, and that's how they practice it. Okay. But that's a subject for another discussion for another time. Okay. Any questions? I think we'll get some more answers to that in chapter 11, but I think a person has to examine himself. I think there's in chapter 11 we see that self-examination. All right. I have trouble with non-Christians singing some of the songs we sing, because how can they sing "Oh How I Love Jesus" when they're not obedient to Him? Sometimes if they're singing some of those songs, they're singing a lie, and so I see that as a problem. And I'm not telling them that they can't sing; I just see it as a problem for them. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Hey, bit Marion.
Yes.
1 Corinthians 14, I know we'll get to, but I mean, it seems to be the case originally. The purpose of worship, of course, is done by Christians, but and we find, in 1 Corinthians 14, there's a guy who's an outsider who comes in.
Yes.
So, so it seems to be the case. It's for the saints, but we're to go out and evangelize and reach others and bring them in. So.
Well, I don't have any problem with them bowing their heads for prayer and everything, but I'm certainly not going to ask them to lead in prayer or lead in singing. Say, I do have a problem with sometimes them singing some of the songs that would actually sing something like "Lord is my God" or something, because He's not their God if they're not obedient to Him. So I think they have a problem, and of course we need to teach them and let them see it, because there are people that pray, and sometimes they're not even in a state to be able to pray to God, and so we've got a problem there. And I'm happy they bow their heads for prayer, and I'm happy they honor God, but they need more than that. They need that's not going to get them to heaven. Okay, that might making sense what I'm saying. Going to have more than, and of course, I'm not going to say you can't come because Romans 14th chapter of 1 Corinthians, we see that they did come. I think they were coming and they observed what was happening. And so we have that situation. Whether they partook of the Lord's Supper is another question. And I think I wouldn't object to them bowing their heads for prayer and things like that. And the singing, as I said, some of the songs, the words of them counter to non-Christian singing. And if you look at the words of some of the songs.
Would you object to their giving?
I don't ask non-Christians to give. If they want to give, that's okay. They can give. That's what I'm saying. And I don't try to drive them away by any means, but I understand they need the gospel. They need to be right. Or they're
I was just thinking, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead. No, again. Go ahead.
I was just thinking of Cornelius is all in this situation.
About what?
Cornelius.
Yes. I think Cornelius was under the patriarchal law until the gospel was preached to him.
I would agree.
I think it ended with at his household, or as it began to be preached to the Gentiles. So, anyhow.
But he was not part of the Jewish nation. Is all I was driving at.
This is a question that has plagued the church. And sometime I was a boy, what's our communion? Is it open or closed? Okay. Okay. Open communion, you invite people to partake. Closed communion, you don't let them partake. And is there something between where you teach them and let them decide for themselves? See, that's another question. Is there a third option? That's what I've always held to. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's a complicated application, though.
Yes, it is.
I've always been taught, well, and in certain settings that you explain this is what it's for, and if you're a Christian, this is for you. Take it. If not, just pass it on by.
I think that's what ought to be done right there. That's where I stand on it.
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of an a fortiori argument concerning Cornelius.
Yes.
And what's true of the lesser is true of the greater. So he was under the lesser covenant in a way of speaking. He wasn't a Jew by any means. But certainly the actions he did were during that covenant.
Yeah. Let me point out something that has bothered me for some time on this. We have, of course, we have the Old Testament. The Jews, only the priest could partake of could offer sacrifices. They're the only ones that could offer sacrifices. And so we run into that. That's the lesser covenant. The New Testament, who are the priests? See, what are the sacrifices? So I have problems with it because the sacrifices are fruit of our lips and the giving and so forth. And so I think we should not be asking non-Christians to give. We should go out and beg money from them, to ask them to put money in the collection plate. Now, if they want to, that's their business. But I'm not going to ask them to. That's why I don't ask them. Yeah, does that make sense? And I don't ask them to sing. If they sing, that's their business. But I get up sometimes and preach that we need to sing with the Spirit and understand what we're singing. Okay. All right, let's move on. This is a troublesome point, and it's a hard thing, I think. All right, let's go to verse 16. The bread, back to it, at which we break, it is the communion of the body of Christ. All right. Now let's look at verse 17. Okay. Chris, could you read that for us?
Yes. Oti eis artos in soma oi poloi esomen oi gar pontes ek tu hinos artu mete komen. I have, for we are many, are one bread and body, for we all partake of the one bread.
All right.
We
So
all, yeah.
we're partaking of that bread. There's a unity in us, and we are united. And I think he's talking to the church. They're the protectors of the bread. That's why I say we should certainly try to get non-Christians to participate in the Lord's Supper. So I think we'll see some other points on it in chapter 14. If they don't think of it properly, they're eating and drinking condemnation to themselves. Seeing that we, who are many, the fact that there were many in the church and yet they were still united, there's that uniting of them. And they were united when they partook of the Lord's Supper. I think they're also united when they give of their means. I think the same word for communion or fellowship was used whenever they gave of their means in Acts 2, right? So I would say they were united when they sang, when they gave of their means, whenever they took the Lord's Supper, when they prayed together as one, when they said amen to the prayer, and that makes them all united. The whole church said amen to a prayer. And I think when they were being taught the gospel and they were all listening and participating in that by studying, I think that's where the fellowship comes in my judgment. Right? Any question there? So, and this is one bread, one body. We're all united. We're one. And since we're all united, and this bread and this fruit of the vine is holy in the sense that it's been set aside for God, we need to be aware that we are holy. We've been sanctified by it. And so we don't need to be participating in idolatrous pagan activities. I think that's part of the context. That's my view of this. Any questions there? We're all to partake of the one bread. We have fellowship or communion with each other in partaking of that bread. Right? But the fellowship was an act of something that was holy. Playing a basketball game together after services is not fellowship. Okay, not the fellowship he's talking about here, at least. Any questions or comments? For we the many are one bread, one body, for we all are partakers out of the one bread. And the bread represents Christ and that unity we have, we're partaking of it. All right. He goes back to Israel, and I think maybe an a fortiori argument. Okay, would you read that for us, James, and translate it?
Yes, sir. Plepete ton Israel katasarka ukioi estiontes pas thusias koinonoi tu thusias deriu asin. And I translated that see or look at Israel according to the flesh. They're not the ones eating the sacrifices, sharers of the altar.
Okay. So they were sharers of that altar. So maybe we shouldn't be going to these pagan temples and eating of their sacrifices. See, so I think in the part of it, we have them going to a person's house to eat. I think that's a different matter. But if he tells you that's offered sacrifice to idols, you don't eat it. And we've already seen that. But if you go to the pagan temple to eat in their temple, then I think you've gone too far. I don't think we should be doing that. We go to someone's house and eat, but not over to the pagan temple to eat. So Israel, those that ate of it were the priests, say. Israel after the flesh. Now, there's two Israels in existence at this time. There's Israel after the flesh, and there's spiritual Israel, the church. That's why he calls it that. And have not they, and this uki is stronger. It's even stronger than u. It's a strong form of u, and it's not now. See, and not at this time. They that eat of the sacrifices, all right, have communion with the altar. And of course, this would be the priest. If the Levitical priest, the lesser priests, have communion with the altar, then all Christians, the greater priest, under the new covenant, have communion with each other. And we have communion also. And the altar is, of course, representative of the sacrifices they ate that were on the altar. This communion, the bread and the fruit of the vine, it represents a sacrifice. It represents it. So we are all partaking of it. And I understand that the Roman Catholics have they used to have only the common people, the laity, would eat the bread, but now that's not true. They've changed it. Now they're letting them also partake of the fruit of the vine. This is a change in the last 8 or 10 years.
I didn't know that.
It's a change they've made, and I think it's a right change. Of course, they got so much more that they need to change. That, still corrupt in their doctrine. But Israel after the flesh, they eat of the sacrifices, have communion with the altar, do they not? So since they have communion, then we're also having communion. We're having a fellowship. We shouldn't be joining in with pagans in their worship. I met a man, and I think he's dead now, but he was doing missionary work over in Hong Kong, and he actually got up in the church and told us, he says, I go into the pagan temples and bow down so that I can get the people to come and study with me. I said, you can't do that. And he was trying to get support. I said, he can't do that. And the elders said, we wouldn't give him a dime, So.
What about denominations? Wouldn't they be classified similarly?
I think they probably would, yes. I've gone to funerals of denominations. I've gone and had debates at denominations, but I don't go worship with them. Now, if I'm at a football game and someone prays, I go ahead and bow my head. I know some brethren that won't bow their head for a denominational person's prayer, but I think when non-Christians see me not bowing my head, they don't understand. And they think I'm not respecting God.
You can also bow your head and pray your own prayer.
Yeah, that's what I do. So I'm not.
Good point.
Not going to do that. What's that?
I thought Jerry made a good point.
I've been to, I had several friends that were Catholic, and I've been to weddings.
Yes.
And they have a communion anytime, if there's a wedding or anything going on. And, but it was always understood, those of us that weren't Catholic wouldn't take part. You're there for the wedding. The Catholics are going to take part. And so they actually line up, and then the priest gives them the wafer. At some of the ones I was at, the priest also had the cup, and he had a white towel, and he very carefully, he took it first, and then they could take the cup also. This is even more than 10 years ago, but not every one of them did that. And but they also make sure you didn't ever spill a drop of it. That's why they got to where the priest only would do it, so
Yeah.
it would not take a chance on being spilled.
But we have problems here with it. Where do we draw this
And I
line?
never felt I didn't do the singing, and I didn't deal. And they made an announcement, if you're not a Catholic and you don't wish to partake in the worship portion of this, you certainly don't have to. But if we're going to do this as a part of our tradition for the wedding. So I did wedding things, but not the worship things. So I don't think I was doing like the idol thing.
I've gone to weddings too and having to preach. And sometimes I've gone to funerals and they preach error. And I'm not going to get up at a funeral and challenge error. But if they want to debate me, I'll have a debate with them, but I'm not going to do it at a funeral. Okay? It's just not the time and place for it. There's a place and a time for stuff. Right, that's my judgment on it. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, verse 19. Shane, have you translated it, or would you like to read it for Jerry? Or
I'll read.
Okay.
Tiun femi hoti edolan ti esten he a hoti edolothuton ti esten.
You mean what I have?
Yeah.
What and I to do, I say then, that an idol is something special, or that the thing sacrificed to an idol is something special?
And so he's saying, do I say that? And it's really not. It's not something anything special. But he's still going to elaborate on it here in the next few verses. Idol is really nothing. We understand that. And we can eat the meat that's been sacrificed to idols. But if we go and participate in their worship, that's a different matter. I think that becomes a different matter. I can eat that meat. We've already laid that out. And the meat's okay to eat. But I can't go worship with him. Right? What do I say then? That an idol is anything, or that a sacrifice idol is anything? All right. Let's go to the next verse. Chris, can you read the next verse and translate it for us?
Yes. Al hoti, he, thue, ta, ethne, demonios, thue, kai, theo, thelo, de, humas, koinonus, tone, the diamonion, geneste. I have, but what these things he sacrifices, the Gentiles, he sacrifices to demons and not to God. And I wish that you not be fellow partakers with the demons.
Okay, let's go back even to the Old Testament. We won't get into demon possession in thorough detail. I've written a pretty lengthy treatise on that, or outlines on it. Angels, Satan, and demons. I got an outline on that. But what I'm saying is, a demon, if my study is correct, is the spirit of a person who's died. Right? Now, I think when you go back into the Old Testament and look and see the basis for this, I think it goes back to the post-flood man. How old was Shem when he died? Does anyone remember? He was 600 years old. Right? And if we look at it, we have a man that's living to be 600 years old, and some of his children and ancestors, his great-great-great-grandchildren, are only living to be 200 years old. And he seems like a god to them. He just keeps living, they keep dying. And I think there's evidence. There's a preacher in the Lord's Church in England that I went over and knew him, and he's dead now. But he did research on it, and he claimed that there's evidence that they were worshiping these men, these old patriarchs that lived so long, that they were worshiping them as gods. And a demon is the spirit of a man who has lived. Now, if you look in Acts 17, you get a hint of that. When they said he's a setter forth of strange gods, the word translated gods is demons there. It's the word for demons. And so they viewed Jesus had done great wonderful works. So he's a mighty man, and he's died now. And so his spirit now is to be worshiped as a demon. And so the demon possession, if someone did great feats, he was worshipped as a god. And so that's some of the lesser gods. I think that's exactly what we see here. They're sacrificing to these demons. And
so it's not a spirit of a person who's came back. It could just be a spirit of a person who died that they honor.
Yep.
Okay, so the coming back part's nothing.
No.
Oh, okay.
But Jesus being resurrected would be a powerful thing, showing his great power to them. That's why they misunderstood in Acts 17, those in Athens at Mars Hill. They set her forth of strange gods, as the word gods is demons. And so I'm satisfied in my mind that if you go back to the Old Testament, you can see that where demons are mentioned, it also fits in with that same interpretation. And it's mentioned 4 or 5 times in the Old Testament where demons is found.
Even more recent societies have often revered ancestors to the point of it being a worship.
Yeah. The Japanese would worship their ancestors.
So I look at this verse, I see a negative connotation with demons here. But that's specifically with this verse. They could have been worshiping a great person like Shem who didn't want the worship.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Yes.
So it wasn't his problem, but they honored him in a way he didn't want.
But
Possibly.
when Paul and Barnabas worked miracles, didn't they want to offer sacrifices to them?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, yes, Shem could have been a good man. I think he probably was. Mm-hmm. And he later, after he dies, they could have been worshiping him because he's godlike, having lived so long.
Okay. I see some translate that devils to try to make it, I guess to lock it in as the only interpretation is a negative connotation.
Well, I think it's negative in that they were not worshiping the true God, of course.
Okay.
But I think this, to me, it explains part of their problems. They would worship the emperors, well, because he's a great man and does great things. See?
And he demanded it.
Right? And they were going to worship them, and they built idols to them and wanted them worshiped too. So they're sacrificing to demons. I think that's what they were, and so a demon was just the spirit of a man. And in the usage of the Greeks, it was used in both contexts as both a good spirit and an evil spirit, both. And if you don't have my notes on that, I'll be happy to send them to you. If you don't have them, if you want them, just let me know later.
And they are not the ones that we direct our worship towards. And so you don't want to fellowship those who are directing the worship to the wrong place.
Right.
The wrong being.
And worshiping Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar.
Or Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. These men were being worshipped at the time, and they were essentially, and I'm not saying they were good men by any means, like Shem probably was. Okay? But again, they're worshiping anybody but God. He shouldn't be worshipped. Deities, no one should be worshipped except deity.
If we went specific on this, well, whatever we could, he's making an example. The Gentiles, they sacrifice to the devils. Here in this case are demons. What might be, who would they be worshiping or what?
Well, one of the views is Jupiter was supposed to be probably was supposed to be Japheth, the god Jupiter.
You mean today?
Well, or in this time, what specifically were they going to worship?
Well,
So,
Jupiter was one person.
so you might say the Roman gods
Yes,
and the Greek gods.
Greek gods, the Roman
That's
gods.
who
Zeus,
they're eyeing.
Zeus and Jupiter are the same god. They're the same god. Zeus is Greek and Jupiter is a Roman.
All right.
And I think some of those lesser gods were some of their children, sons of them, and maybe some of the women that lived 500 years old too, 500 or 600 years. I suspect Shem's wife probably lived about as long as he did. Now, does that help a little bit and see some of the background of this? Of course, it's still evil, whether they're good or bad men, they're still evil to worship them.
Yes. Yeah. I couldn't picture who they were worshiping.
Even the angels wouldn't allow worship of them.
Yeah.
Themselves.
Yeah.
They're directed towards God and God only. So if they're not directed towards God, you don't join them.
Can't join in with them. That help? Shane, James, you got any comments there?
No, sir, I do, I'll make this one quick comment. I do recall some writings by a guy named, I think I have a copy of his book here, Ken Johnson, if you've ever heard of him. He did a number of different books on the early creation and slightly thereafter the generations. And he did mention the worship of the patriarchs in his book.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual, I don't think.
I haven't done all of the research, but I've seen some of the stuff that's been written about it. I'm convinced it's probably true. It's probably the explanation for it. It makes perfectly good sense, and it's still wrong, even if they were good men like Shem. I don't even know that Japheth was a bad man. I don't think he probably was. I think he was probably a good man. But his children turned out bad. They began to worship idols and everything. Anyhow, any questions? I'm a descendant of Japheth by and large, to a large extent, mostly. I don't know where all my ancestors came from. It doesn't matter. I'm a descendant of Noah. You are too. We're cousins. Any questions? So they sacrificed to demons. I don't believe Thayer's definition, I don't believe is correct. If you go to Thayer's definition. I'll send you my notes if you don't have them. Josephus and Philo, Josephus used it as a spirit of a human, but he used it exclusively for evil spirits. And Philo, who's also a Jewish writer of that same time, a first century time period, he used it for both good and evil spirits of humans. Okay. He used both. And some other sources cite in the first, second century members of the church cite, and they use the term. This is how it was used in Acts 17. They had no idea that Jesus was not a good person from Paul's preaching, yet they concluded he was a demon. Okay. And again, they are trying to fit Jesus into their picture. And they can't view him as God in the flesh. And if he's a God, he's one of the lesser gods. Okay. Any questions?
For today, I wouldn't go into a mosque during a worship service that they were worshiping.
No.
I wouldn't. If I went in, it would be as with a group of other people who were obviously tourists.
Yeah.
Even if it was local, I mean, it would be something. I kind of wanted to see inside the new, not a mosque.
The Mormons they built a temple here in Oklahoma City, and I wanted to go over and see it. I've been in the Mormon tabernacle.
No, I did too, but not during services.
I was in the Mormon tabernacle in 1953. They let you in back then. I saw it. It was a beautiful place. But again, I wouldn't go in and worship with them. But we saw it. My parents took me to see it, and Daddy told us they're false religions, children. But you can see what they're doing, and then he talked about them, what they taught that was there. Okay. Any questions? All right. Now, if you notice at the bottom of it, I have the textual sources. Let me point out, if you have my Role of Women book, in that book, I set forth how to do an exegesis. And the first step is you got to determine that it's part of the canon of the scriptures, it's scripture. Then the second point is you need to look at the text and be sure you got the right Greek or Hebrew text. And so this is what I've done. You have that information for you in the notes. You can follow it up, do your own study for yourself, okay? And if you check it out and find errors, let me know and I'll correct them, okay? I wouldn't guarantee I don't have errors in it. So I don't desire, my will.
I put not my intention, get to the point of will.
I think intention is probably real good because it's an inclination and intent that we should have communion with demons. I don't want you participating with them. Now, Ignatius in the 2nd century used the term to refer to Jesus. He used that word to refer to Jesus. All right. And he wrote in the 2nd century, remember the church. Okay?
I was wondering if I should actually make that a little different. I did it the way that was worded, but I thought about it, sacrifice to demons and not to God, and it is my intention for you not to become fellow partakers of demons is actually, to me, more clear of what Paul would have been saying.
Let me give you right here.
I just moved the knot around a little bit.
On the screen, you can see it, that you should not have communion. Now, this is the middle passive form, but all of these authorities claim it's middle voice, okay? And so you should not cause yourself to have communion. See, middle voice. You should
Well, that
not.
actually fits better with the way I wanted to reword it too.
So it's middle passive form, so it could be passive, but the Thayer and others claim it's middle voice, and passive voice doesn't fit in in the context very well. All right. So I would translate it that it's right on the center of the screen right now, that you cause yourself to have communion with demons. So you shouldn't be causing yourself to have communion. You made that decision to go participate in that temple, in that pagan temple. All right. Now, I'm not going to go over to the Mormon church and worship with them. I may eat a meal with one Mormon and talk with him and be a friend with him and try to convert him, but I'm certainly not going to go worship with him. And I just won't do that. So I won't be in communion with them. If I go to a funeral and they're singing songs with a piano, I won't sing. Does that make sense? I just don't sing. I won't do it. I'm gonna do that and compromise what I believe. So that's where I'm gonna draw the line there. I'm not gonna do it. I translate it, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, not to God, and I would not that you should cause yourselves to have communion with demons. And right here, I give some sources for it. Ignatius, Epistle to Smyrna. This is on the internet. You can actually find this on the internet. You can find it in both Greek and the English text. But he interprets the resurrected spirit to be a demon, where he says here, lay hold and handle me. He's quoting Jesus, see that I am not a demon without body. That's exactly the word he uses. Ignatius in about AD 130 wrote this, approximately AD 130. And it's a member of the church. Now, I'm not saying he's inspired of God by any means, but I'm saying this was not a problem for the early church to take this view, because it's just a spirit that's been raised or come back out of the Adian realm. That's how they were viewing it.
So in this case, it's a spirit who returned.
Yes.
Okay, but it's just literally just a spirit.
Yeah. Yes.
But this was more specific, a
Yeah.
spirit who returned and
Yeah.
occupied a body.
So Henry, I'm not a demon without body. So Ignatius interprets a resurrected spirit to be a demon. He uses the word demon in the way that's used by the people at that time. And of course, here's Josephus, and I cite him and send these notes. Wars 763. He limits demons to the spirit of wicked people. And probably the demons that were inhabiting people were wicked people who were allowed out of Tartarus. I think that's God allowed them out for a purpose. We don't have time to go into that. Philo, in his treatise concerning the world on the giants, he defines it there as a common usage, both good and evil spirits. You have to read a paragraph or two to get it. I didn't put the whole paragraph in there. Right? Josephus is probably limited his definition of the demon of his time, and Philo and Ignatius are using the proper definition of daemonio from the Greeks. I think, again, as I pointed out, Acts 17:18, set her forth as strange gods, and there was a misunderstanding, of course, of Jesus. How many people misunderstand Jesus? Are there not those that don't believe he's deity even? He's just a good man. And of course, they're all wrong. He's God incarnate. And so he understood he spoke of a man who ascended to heaven, and they viewed this as saying Jesus was a God at his ascension. Anyhow, I have more notes down here. Jacob's sons and grandsons would have lived several hundred years and seemed to be godlike. Shem was claimed to be alive by the Jews in the days of Abraham. Of course, I believe they got it all wrong. I think they modified the text of the Hebrew scriptures because of the arguments being made by the church on Melchizedek. There's evidence they did in the 2nd century. They modified the text of the scriptures. How do I know they modified the text of the scriptures? Because they have a genealogy that leaves out a man that's in Luke's genealogy. And Luke's genealogy is not challenged. There's no textual problem with it. And the Septuagint and the Pentateuch, Samaritan Pentateuch, both of those have this man in it that's in Luke's genealogy. And then also he's mentioned by Josephus. So we see here we have 3 different independent sources all giving this man. And Luke is the clincher. Luke has that guarantee he's right. It's right. He's in that genealogy. And so they fudged and changed the genealogy so that they claim that Melchizedek was really Shem. And so that's why he's greater. Okay, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's their own history. We're the great ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
They modified the text. Right. It's about time for us to call a halt to it. Right here is my outline, and I don't think this may still be on the internet, but I've made some modifications in it. So if you want it, I'll send it to you. Okay. We'll start with verse 21 next week and get into the fellowship. I'm sorry I got off on demons, but I think we need to kind of understand them. Any questions?
I would accept a copy of that if you've made modifications to it, the
Right.
article on demons.
All right, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Want to?
Yeah, I might have it, but go ahead and send it to me.
All right.